Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Seuk Kim. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. Seuk Kim was born on June 28, 1975, in Seoul, South Korea. His mother owned a clothing store. In 1985, Seuk's family moved to Burke, Virginia, which is near Washington, D.C. He adjusted well to this new environment, including learning English. As a teenager, Seuk demonstrated sensation-seeking behavior. For example, he raced motorcycles in a local motocross circuit. In 1998, he earned a bachelor's degree in marketing. In 2005, Seuk earned an MBA. He worked for a marketing and public relations company in Alexandria, Virginia. At some point, Seuk worked on Wall Street in New York City. After a few years there, he moved back to Virginia and lived in the town of Springfield. He married a woman named Anna, and they had 3 children, Leah, Isaac, and Mason. In 2019, Seuk decided to quit his high-paying job and mentioned how he had a childhood dream of being a pilot. He attended a flight training program in Richmond, Virginia for nearly a year and became a certified commercial pilot in 2020. He told his friends that he had a job lined up with a charter airline. In 2021, Seuk started volunteering for an organization called Pilots and Paws, using his own single-engine piston aircraft. This organization transports animals like cats and dogs to areas where adoption would be more likely. One common scenario involved transporting animals from the south to areas in the northeast. For a variety of reasons, including cultural differences, many pets in the south become abandoned, and finding someone to adopt them in that area can be quite difficult. Pilots like Seuk gave these animals a new lease on life by transporting them to areas with more demand. There are more people in the Northeast willing to adopt. Seuk was a very active volunteer for the organization. He flew 1 to 3 missions a week. Like all the pilots, he did this at his own expense, including his fuel costs. He even purchased a larger aircraft in October 2024 to accommodate more dogs. It was a 1986 Mooney M20J201. This is a single-engine piston aircraft with retractable gear. It is powered by a 200 horsepower fuel-injected engine and can reach a top cruising speed of 201 miles per hour. There were no signs that Seuk was going to slow down. He was determined to save as many dogs as he could. Now moving to the timeline of the incident. On November 24, 2024, Seuk Kim drove 24 miles from his home in Springfield to the Manassas Regional Airport where he stored his aircraft. He flew 28 miles from this airport to Culpeper Regional Airport, where he picked up 4 dogs, Money, Lisa, Whiskey, and Pluto. The dogs were in crates which were protected by blankets and held into the cabin using bungee cords. At around 3:31 p.m., Seuk took off from Culpeper Regional Airport and flew about 115 miles northeast to Hartford County Airport in Churchville, Maryland. There, he dropped off the dog named Money. At about 4:40 p.m., Seuk took off with the 3 remaining dogs on board, Lisa, Whiskey, and Pluto. His destination was the Albany International Airport in the state of New York, about 250 miles to the north. By 6 p.m., Seuk was about 50 miles from his destination. Sunset was at 4:25 p.m., so he was flying in the dark. He contacted air traffic control at 6:02 p.m., and reported that he was experiencing moderate to heavy turbulence. He descended from 5,000 feet to 4,300 feet and indicated that the turbulence was now light to moderate. This was his last transmission. At 6:10 p.m., the authorities received a no-voice 911 call from Seuk's cell phone. At around the same time, the Albany airport reported that his aircraft had disappeared from their radar while flying near Windham, New York. This is a rural area in the Catskill Mountains, about 35 miles southwest of Albany. Emergency responders tried to make their way to the crash site, but there was 2 feet of snow on the ground. The trip took quite some time. It wasn't until 9:30 p.m. when they reached the general search area. At 11:38 p.m., they found the wreckage of Seuk's aircraft. It had slammed into trees on a mountain while traveling at 140 miles per hour. The wreckage was spread over an 80-foot area. The puppy Lisa was found dead in the wreckage. 2 hours later, now on November 25, 2024, rescuers found Seuk's body. It appeared as though he died as a result of the impact as opposed to freezing to death. Rescuers also found the 4-month-old Labrador Retriever mix, Whiskey. He had 2 broken legs, but he was alive. Whiskey was sent to foster care where he is expected to recover. At 1:30 p.m., the 18-month-old Yorkshire Terrier mix, Pluto, was found. He had sustained minor injuries. Pluto was adopted by a couple who renamed him Jack. The National Transportation Safety Board launched an investigation into the cause of the collision. At the time I'm making this video, the investigation continues. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. The preliminary report offered by the NTSB offered some clues as to what could have caused this aircraft disaster. At the time of the collision, Seuk was flying in less than ideal conditions. It was dark outside, 39 degrees Fahrenheit. He was flying over mountains. He experienced turbulence, and cloud cover was becoming problematic. Seuk was trying to stay under the cloud cover above him and flying very close to the terrain below him in order to maintain visual contact with it. At 6:02 p.m., just a few minutes before the collision, he was flying at 5,000 feet. At 6:05 p.m., he descended below 4,000 feet. At 6:07 p.m., he descended below 3,500 feet. At about 6:08 p.m., Seuk slammed into wooded mountainous terrain at an elevation of 3,090 feet. There is no reason to believe the aircraft experienced any type of mechanical failure. Rather, this was a controlled flight into terrain. Seuk simply flew the aircraft into the ground. I think what happened here is that he put himself in a bad situation by flying under a number of unfavorable conditions. There were simply too many risk factors to worry about at the same time. Seuk was trying to thread the needle and stay at an altitude where he could avoid the clouds and see the ground at the same time, but he ended up losing track of the ground. The mountain that he ran into appears to have been the last one before the airport. It's also possible that he started descending, not realizing that mountain was there, like he thought he had cleared the mountain and it was safe to descend. One thing is for certain, no matter what caused this collision, this particular flight was unnecessary. Seuk had all the time in the world. There was no need for him to risk his life to get to Albany that particular day. There is no doubt that Seuk Kim was a decent man who wanted to make the world a better place. He not only volunteered flying animals around, he was involved in other charitable endeavors. Sometimes when an individual becomes so focused on doing good, other considerations, like safety, may inadvertently be pushed to the back seat. This brings me to item number 2. The research tells us that pilots have an unusual mix of personality traits which make them effective at flying. They are conscientious, self-disciplined, remain calm under pressure, and tend to be inquisitive. At the same time, they typically have a level of excitement-seeking higher than the general population. It is not unusual to see a pilot who has an interest in finding adventure. In the case of Seuk, he was not only interested in flying, but racing motorcycles and airsoft combat sports. There are times when a desire to find thrills can run counter to the mission of aviation safety. I've noticed that sometimes when pilots take risks, they don't necessarily minimize those risks. Rather, they place a high level of importance on the purpose of the flight. So the risks are considerable, but the elevated probability of death is worth it due to the critical nature of the mission. This is not entirely irrational. For example, combat pilots could find themselves in this type of situation. They may be looking at a dangerous mission that has a massive payoff, like saving hundreds of lives. Perhaps this type of thinking was evident in this case. Seuk recognized that he was flying in hazardous conditions, but he placed a tremendous amount of weight on the importance of his mission to justify taking the chances. The problem is, flying dogs to a shelter is not the same thing as blowing up an enemy installation or dropping off a SEAL team to rescue hostages. Seuk created a risky adventure when none was necessary. Item number 3. One thing I found very interesting about this story was this idea that flying dogs to the Northeast was necessary because, generally, people in the South had a tendency to abandon dogs. This seems like such a strange occurrence considering how large the South is. In the entirety of this massive region, there's no way to find people to adopt a dog? After the collision, when people were notified that Pluto survived, over 100 families expressed an interest in adopting him. Curiously, some of these families were from Georgia, which is where Pluto was found abandoned on a highway. Maybe this dog adoption issue isn't a question of supply and demand as much as it is of marketing. Pluto did not need to be flown to Albany to find a home. Rather, he just needed the right public image. When Pluto was wandering on the highway, no one wanted him. When he was the survivor of a terrible aircraft collision, he was in demand. He had over 100 possible homes. People want dogs who have been on a hero's journey. I guess what it comes down to is that some people will only adopt a dog if they feel as though the dog deserves it. Like the dog has to earn this privilege. If the dog can somehow prove that he's a courageous warrior, then he will be spared the kill shelter. If he does not demonstrate uncommon valor, then his fate will be sealed. What a strange rationale for saving a dog from death. Perhaps this animal adoption problem doesn't require aircraft as much as it does some creative resume writing. Dogs need to receive training on how to write more compelling and dramatic backstories in order to get the attention of people to adopt them. I can imagine a recently abandoned dog meeting with a writing teacher. The teacher is like, "So tell me about a time in your life when you experienced adversity." The dog is like, "I lived in a house where the air conditioning was broken. It was really warm in there." The writer thinks for a few moments and says, "That's great, but let's change a few details. Instead of an air conditioning failure, let's go with chemical explosion. Instead of a warm house, let's go with a house engulfed in flames. Staying there would have certainly resulted in death. Rather than resigning to your fate, you clawed your way through drywall, insulation, plywood, and vinyl siding to escape the house. In the process, you also rescued a few small children." There is no doubt that creative writing is more affordable than flying, and for the most part, a lot safer. There is no shortage of people capable of adopting dogs. There is a shortage of motivation. Those are my thoughts in the case of Seuk Kim. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.